This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo, giving you the inside track on all the big talking points from Anfield.
Hello and welcome along to the latest Liverpool Echo Blood Red podcast. I'm your host Matt Addison, Ian Doyle and Keifer MacDonald both alongside me here in the Liverpool Echo offices. We're going to have a little bit of a chat about Darmstadt last night. We're going to have a talk about Romeo Lavia as well. We'll get the latest on that a little bit later in the show, but we'll start with last night first, Doyle. You were there, Theo was there, Jörg Schmadtke was there as well to watch along. What did you make of the game? Obviously Liverpool's final pre-season match. It was fairly similar to what we've seen in other pre-season games as well, I'd suggest.
Yeah, Liverpool really good going forward and somewhat less so defensively. It was a step up in standard compared to everybody bar Bayern Munich for Liverpool, I think, in the games that they've played so far. What was interesting is Darmstadt going into the game, I think we'd done our research, hadn't we, for once, one of these games, and they'd played 4 friendlies and they hadn't scored a single goal, but they'd only conceded 3 and they'd had 2-0 nils in the last 2, so when Liverpool go 2-0 up after about 8 minutes, you're thinking, well, this is actually quite a good performance so far. And then Darmstadt get that goal, which was a goal that anyone who's watched any of Liverpool's games over the last 3 or 4 weeks would recognise. Just a ball over the top and they're in, and they managed to tuck it away. So after that, there were 1 or 2 moments of concern for Liverpool, but mostly it was them kind of showcasing their attacking prowess. And but for all of that, 2 of the 3 goals were from set pieces. I mean, Dominic Szoboszlai, his corners from the left. I think there's been 3 goals now in the last 3 games that have come from that. I think Ben Doak's header against Leicester was from there as well. So, but then, let's be honest, the main talking point is the fact that they didn't have a defensive midfielder again. Alexis McAllister he started in the game. Curtis Jones had started the previous 2. Trent Alexander-Arnold the 2 before that. And McAllister, I thought, again, played really, really well. I think he's going to be somebody who's going to have a massive role to play for Liverpool this season, and I mean straight from the off. But whether or not that should be playing as a number 6, I'm not so sure, because while we don't really know what to expect from Chelsea, because they've just spent the last 18 months just buying 1,000,001 players and moving them out, and got a new manager as well with Pochettino, so we'll have to wait and see on that one. I'm sure we'll discuss that a bit later in the week. But in terms of the game against Darmstadt, I don't think anybody would have been surprised by the way it went, really. I thought Liverpool, good on the ball, slack at moments defensively. You could tell that 1 or 2 individuals are a little bit uncomfortable at the lack of defensive cover. You see Van Dijk, certainly first half, wasn't too happy at players running at him from midfield. That's always been a problem. If anything, that's the only really, he's kind of his weak point, as it were. And the fact that he's not getting any younger doesn't help. They got a little bit more on top of it second half. And Andy Robertson, kind of the same thing. He's not quite able to push forward as much as normal. So it's more of a test of him defensively. So, again, there weren't any particularly awful performances. I'm sure we'll come on to 1 or 2 who impressed, certainly in the second half, coming off the bench. But for Liverpool, they've kind of done what they needed to do this summer in terms of on the pitch. The problem is, off the pitch, they've still got this big hole that, unfortunately, Saudi Arabia has dug for them by taking off Jordan Henderson for Fabinho.
We'll come back to the midfield in just a second. Let's start with a couple of positives. Liverpool have scored lots and lots of goals. Lots of different players have scored as well. We've seen lots of different elements of their attacking play. It does feel, though, Keifer, like it's going to be a case of you score 3 and probably concede 2 and suddenly you're putting a little bit of pressure on yourself in that regard.
Absolutely. It feels like 17-18 and if you go further back, 13-14, where Liverpool challenged for the big honours, but ultimately their lack of defensive structure let them down. Obviously in the Premier League in 2013-14, and got to the Champions League final in 2017-2018. Obviously lost to Real Madrid, but as you say, plenty of exciting elements in that forward line. Diogo Jota was good again, pressed well. I thought Luis Diaz really played himself into contention for a start of the weekend. Personally, before the game, I would have had Jota, Gakpo and Salah as my front 3, depending on where Klopp views Gakpo, if he views him as a left-sided midfielder now, or if that's just a case to get all of his attacking talents into one side. But I think Diaz was bright again. He was a real live wire and kind of showed, kind of picked up where he left off last season before his injury. Really, he was one of Liverpool's brightest prospects. Looking to start his first full season at Liverpool, but obviously missed 5 months, 6 months in the end, and had that bit of time towards the end of last season where I think that's really done him well and set him up for pre-season, where he's had that kind of return to first team football, the intensity, and now he's just looking to build on that with the sharpness, and his goal was a brilliant flick at the near post, as Doyle says, from another Szoboszlai corner. So plenty to be excited about in that regard. Obviously Salah kind of continues his his role as Liverpool's chief curator. I think it's only 2 goals for him in pre-season, but I think 7 assists in total, which is a fine effort for him, and maybe we'll see him redefine his game almost as he kind of enters these latter years of also firstly his Liverpool contract, but also his career as he maybe loses that bit of explosiveness, and then Gakpo in a, as I say, in a different role to what we'd seen previously on the left side of a makeshift midfield 3 with McAllister at the base and Szoboszlai on the right, but he did well. I personally prefer him as the false 9. I think we were saying it in the office earlier. I think what he brings in terms of his spatial awareness and dropping into pockets, I think could really hurt Chelsea. So I will be keen to see him there at the weekend. But I don't think there really is a first choice front 3 anymore. I think it is very much how we've seen Klopp operate his midfield in years gone by. It's very much horses for courses, and depending on the assignment and the opposition and the competition and kind of the fixture schedule is what we'll see Liverpool operate with. I think, we could all name a front 3 now, but I think we probably have different answers. I think the only person you could really say is nailed on is Mo Salah, and that's obviously because of what he's done for Liverpool over the past 6 or 7 years, but also because there probably isn't that competition on the right-hand side that Liverpool boasts on the not only down the centre but also on the left with the likes of Luis Diaz and Darwin Núñez, and then you throw Ben Doak into that mix who had a fine cameo at the end of the game. I thought that was another real positive, someone who's really staked his claim to stay around at Anfield for the not only the Europa League games but also we're talking about extended Premier League added time in the coming weeks and months. He's certainly someone who could rack up 25-30 minutes every week, so that's certainly another exciting prospect for Liverpool fans to kind of lick the lips at. But I thought McAllister was kind of the overall positive. I think he just showed how, as Doyle says, he's a footballer who looks like he's going to hit the ground running at Liverpool, and I think that's desperately what they need. They haven't got the midfielders in, or certainly the number of midfielders in that people would have expected coming up to this first game of the season. We know there was obviously a third bid rejected for Lavia earlier this week, and it looks like McAllister is now going to be the man to start at the base of midfield come Chelsea on Sunday afternoon, regardless of what happens with Lavia. I mean, if he was to magically appear and sign on the dotted lines before the end of the week, it would be a huge ask to throw him in. But I think the way in which he operated, McAllister, and not only his pressing, but he's quite a diminutive figure, but he still put himself about, won his duels, one possession high up, and that was kind of all the things that Klopp had been looking to see from his midfielders. So I think that just kind of reaffirms what a talented footballer Liverpool have got on their hands, and that £35 million fee. I know we haven't played a competitive game this season, but it just looks shrewder by the week and with each passing minute. So that was certainly one of the overriding positives from last night's outing.
Go back to the forwards. So if you've got the 5 forwards, who's 5th choice at the moment? Who's
Núñez.
Now, what was he? 65 million pounds, and he's actually had quite a decent summer. Yet he's going to be 5th choice.
He's the joint top scorer, isn't he, in pre-season?
I think the interesting thing, though, is it depends where Jurgen Klopp views him, because last year when he was brought in, the kind of message was that Liverpool were going to slowly transition away from this false 9, Roberto Firmino mold that they'd had over the last 6, 7, 8 years, and they were going to go to this more out and out number 9 in Darwin Núñez and maybe put more emphasis on the wide players. But within 5 or 6 months that had changed. Obviously Gakpo comes through in January and hits the ground running and has a really strong end to the season. I think now, Jota's obviously played in the 9 as well, but he's also been made to, during his Liverpool career, play out on the left. And I think Klopp likes that because of his work rate off the ball and, going back the other way. And you talk about now in Robertson's new role where he's going to have to, be a bit more cautious. I think Jota really suits that, but I think Núñez's role really depends on if Klopp views him as a left-sided forward going long-term or as a number 9, because if he is the number 9, he's probably got Gakpo to deal with. And I think that's quite a difficult transition for Liverpool to do game to game, because not only are you asking, your strikers to do a completely different job, but it also affects, Salah, Diaz and Jota, but also the 2 midfield number 8s behind them. But then it depends if you view Jota and Diaz as his 2 left-sided options, or again if he throws Núñez into that, it's Núñez, Diaz and Jota, and then you've got the one down the middle. So I think, as I say, it would be very much horses for courses, and I think Klopp will obviously do it game by game. I don't think there is such a thing as a set front 3 at the minute.
How much do you think we should read into the 3 that started yesterday? Does that suggest that that's the 3 for the weekend, do you think, in the forward line?
Probably not, because Gakpo probably won't be playing in midfield against Chelsea. So I'd have him starting, which is an interesting one, because it's Salah's definitely starting, and I'd definitely play Gakpo down the middle. And so you're left with between Diaz and Jota, and I actually think Jota probably still is just a bit ahead of Diaz. I also think that's partly because of his defensive qualities. I think he'll be able to drop back a little bit, and with Liverpool presumably not having bought a defensive midfielder by then, and even if they do, it'd be bit of a surprise to just chuck them straight in, to be honest. They'll be working on a formation this week. Jurgen Klopp said it, didn't he, after the game? He said, we're now looking for ways of finding a formation that's going to play against Chelsea, not necessarily for the rest of the season. So I think Jota's probably just ahead of Diaz. But, I mean, it's 5 subs, isn't it? So you can, if things aren't going to plan, you can just throw Diaz on, throw Núñez on, whoever. You can throw Doak on it there, Ben Doak on it at the end, if you really want to just liven things up somewhat, given what he's done in the warm-up games this summer. So I do think that, I'd go Gakpo down the middle because, as Keifer said, he's more in that mould of Firmino. And I think, again, defensively, Klopp said, I think it was out in Singapore, he said, after Núñez had scored against Leicester, he says, look, we still need forwards who can defend. Yeah. He didn't come out and say it, but the inference obviously is because we've got so little defensive protection in midfield compared to what they normally have, is they're going to have to start defending a bit more strongly from the front, and certainly Jota can do that. Certainly Gakpo can do that purely because he drops deep. Núñez less so because he's a different type of player, and Salah's been doing that for years. I think I remember, what was it when they beat City 4-3 in January 2018. I think the next game they got beat by Swansea
1-0 on the Monday, wasn't it?
Swansea, and Klopp absolutely was fuming at Mane and Salah because they weren't defensively. He didn't say, again, it's another inference. He didn't say, oh, you've gone big time because you beat Man City and played really well going forward. You still got to do the dirty work. And I think for the pair of them, since then there was never any issue with them. I think with Núñez, it's a bit more difficult because Salah had been at the club for 6 months, had already played in the Premier League. Mane had obviously been at the club for 18 months and he'd played in the Premier League for quite a few years. So Núñez is still trying to get used to all of that. And I think at the moment, the reason that he's probably 5th choice is purely on that reason, because as we've seen, he's actually been playing quite well. He scored the goals. He's looked threatening. He looks more sharp. He looks more like the player that Liverpool spent all that money on. But the season's long. Liverpool hope to play 55, 56, 57 games if things go to plan in the Europa League. So everyone will get the chances. And unfortunately, as we saw last year, Jota and Diaz fell over within, for half the season. So there will be opportunities, and Núñez just has to stick with it because, would anybody be surprised if he came off the bench and scored the winner at Chelsea? No.
And then all of a sudden you're talking about him starting at Bournemouth and probably Newcastle the week after. So, as Ian says there, the chances of all 5 of your forwards singing and from the same hymn sheet at the same time and all being on form is something that probably isn't going to happen. And I think at times last year, there was perhaps an over-reliance on the lads at the top end of the pitch to score the goals. Liverpool don't, traditionally under Jurgen Klopp have a lot of midfielders who can kind of ease that burden. And you look at the games where Liverpool failed to score, away at Wolves, away at Brighton, those kind of games. To have options off the bench where you can, throw someone on, even if it is a Ben Doak, a Luis Diaz, for 30 minutes, 40 minutes, whoever, is not in the starting front three. I think that's could prove to be a real difference maker for Liverpool. I think you only have to look at City and the options they've had. Mahrez, obviously he's just left now, but they've had Mahrez, Foden, Palmer, Aguero, all these players, and consistently they've all kind of, at the end of the season, they tally up about 20 goals each, it feels like. So it's certainly not a bad problem for Liverpool to have.
You didn't even mention Haaland either.
No, I'm trying not to be fair.
Just the 50 odd goals for him.
Yeah, well, he had a quiet community shield. We all know what comes next.
Yeah.
Anyway, in terms of what you mentioned before, what Jurgen Klopp said about maybe making a couple of tweaks for that Chelsea game, what do you think that looks like? I've got an idea of what I would do in my head, but whether that's what Jurgen Klopp is thinking, I'm not sure.
The reality is, don't know what he's thinking, because he probably doesn't know it himself, which is why he said, I'm going to have to sit down and think about this. The other complication is, who knows what Chelsea are going to be playing? They've signed 1,001 players, and then we've just found out that their main striker is Nkunku, is it? Nkunku, yeah, he's out for 4 months, is it? Yeah. December, yeah, because he's done his knee. So that's a blow for them. But I mean, in some ways, that's the start of every season, isn't it? You don't really know how the other team's going to perform. So, is it a good time for Liverpool to be playing Chelsea? It probably is, in that respect, because at least we kind of know what to expect from Liverpool. But going back to your question, I think there's two options on the table. Even if Lavia comes, he's not going to play, as far as I'm concerned. So you're left with two options. One is go with Curtis Jones and put Trent at right back, which personally I probably wouldn't do that. The other one is play Trent in the defensive midfield and play Gomez at right back, and he's not played hardly. In terms of competitive games, he's not played very often at right back, has he? Joe Gomez in the last 12, 18 months. I think he's played a couple of good games the other season. And while I've said two things, the third one is slightly left field in the sense that Liverpool haven't played this formation for quite some time. Is go 4-2-3-1, Trent at right back, and just play Jones and McAllister as the deep line too, and then just sacrifice a little bit of the forward line, because you'd probably want to play Soboslai or Soboslai, what we're saying there again. Yeah. He could play in that kind of the central position, because that's more his kind of natural position. Certainly that's what he played more at Leipzig. Although he has played on the left. And I think that's where long term he'll be playing, on the left of the midfield three for Liverpool. And then you can still play your three forwards, but you won't be playing, four with Gakpo or Jota playing a bit deeper. So I think those are the three things. Which one would I do? I'd go 4-2-3-1, but that's probably the one that he won't do.
I'd go 4-2-3-1 as well, but I would do Trent as one of the two with McAllister.
Well, you play
and Gomez at right back.
Yeah. So you're actually getting
a combination of the two.
You're not playing Jones.
I wouldn't play Jones. No. Well, maybe you could play Jones a little bit further forward instead of a Gakpo or a Jota. But which way would you go, Keifer?
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, Trent has played there against lesser opposition so far this pre-season. Obviously, had more time on the ball, and even so, I think the Bundesliga started last weekend. So the teams Liverpool did play out in Germany, and even Leicester, to be fair, and Singapore were slightly ahead in their pre-season. I think also, as Doyle will know from being in Singapore, the conditions.
It was a bit warm.
Very warm.
It was very deep. But it wasn't just Liverpool, though. Was it? All the teams were the same. It's it's not like
that's what I mean,
in Leicester it's suddenly really warm compared to Liverpool. I know that in Germany it can get a bit toasty in the summer, but they're not really used to those conditions. And also Bayern Munich had just come back from Japan, so they'd had quite a long tour.
But in terms of like pressing, the opposition that Liverpool face, it wouldn't have been, certainly out in Singapore, it wouldn't have been as kind of relentless as you're going to.
Well, what I would say about that, the Bayern Munich game felt like a proper game.
Yeah,
it was a bit ridiculous for the first 20 minutes, and I think Klopp said afterwards, he was like, after 10 minutes, you could see the players were like, "This is hard work." This, he wasn't quite expecting this.
The flip side of that is that everyone was, as you say, after the first 20-30 minutes, I think everyone realised it was a friendly, but also the conditions and the heat. I think that took a toll, and that's why there was a lot of gaps and a lot of time on the ball, and obviously it ended up 4-3. So that was certainly telling, but. I think Trent has a capability to play there. He's played there with the under-16s, obviously under Pep Linders. I just think it's about getting bodies there. So I think you've got to do it as a two, haven't you, really? And I think putting Trent it did work for Liverpool towards the back end of last season, but I'm still not entirely convinced by it. I think long term it has its drawbacks. I think it's an awful lot of pressure on Trent, not just mentally in terms of positioning, but I think physically on his body. At 24 years of age, it is a huge ask to ask him to essentially cover two positions. I also think the same with Ibrahim Konate, who is probably Liverpool's only athletic defender, if you get what I'm trying to get at here. He's had a few.
He's the only one who can run.
He's the only one who can cover 10 yards in a relatively respectable space of time. So I think
sounds about right. Yeah.
If you're asking him to then cover two positions as well, I think as Doyle says, over a 50 game season, 55-60 game season, that is an enormous ask. So I think if you start Trent in midfield in a two, whether that be with McAllister or Jones, I think that automatically eases his, the burden of him going the other way. And I think if you put someone like Gomez there, who I know hasn't had the greatest of kind of records in recent years, but I thought he's looked good at pre-season so far when he's played. Obviously, he's been captain a few times during the second half, but I thought last night he slotted him well again, albeit against the Bundesliga new boys. But I think he showed that he perhaps doesn't leave Liverpool as vulnerable on the counter-attack in transition. And as you can see from Liverpool's opening goal, they scored. Darmstadt's opening goal last night. It was a route one ball over the top, and as Doyle says, tracking runners from midfield has been a problem for Liverpool. I mean, watching that goal gave me real flashbacks to the game in Naples last year, where I think it was Anguissa and Zelensky scored a few goals, didn't they? And it just seemed to be that Gomez and Trent and Van Dijk and Robertson in that back four, and I think Milner, Elliott, and Fabinho was a midfielder that night. They just couldn't deal with the runners, and that kind of set the tone for Liverpool's season. So I think if they get Trent in there and they get McAllister, they've got legs, they've got experience in the Premier League as well, but also they've got the cover of Gomez on the right side, which I think will serve them well, because I don't think anyone knows what to expect from Chelsea. They've got a few decent signings, and they've added a lot to their ranks in the last couple of years. They've also got a new manager, a new way of playing, and first home game at Stamford Bridge. I'm sure their tails will be wagging for that one.
Yeah, I'm sure they will have watched Liverpool in pre-season as well, and they know the way to get at Liverpool is to just knock one over the top and do that.
Or play it down the inside right channel and then you're away. Yeah.
And that's the worry, isn't it? I'm not quite sure how Liverpool can fix that in this formation. It does feel like it's going to be the way a little bit in terms of this season.
That's the thing, is that every formation's got its weak points, and unfortunate because Liverpool's one is so unusual. There's not many teams play at City or at the obvious example.
And Arsenal as well have done it a few times. Yeah.
Not with an attacking left back though as well. Liverpool have took it to another level again, haven't they?
I think that you can. It's one where a lot of people look at it. Whereas if you play 4-4-2, 4-3-3. Because everybody plays it, it's almost like everybody's negated all of the possible ways you could possibly get the most of it, and it just becomes a battle between two teams who's the best one. So that's what makes tactics quite interesting in a way. But whenever something different turns up, people are looking at it and go, "Oh well, there's no such thing as the tactic that can win absolutely everything. Otherwise, everybody would just play it." And of course, the players make the system, and Liverpool, as we know quite well, do not have all the players who can play in that system at the moment because they haven't got this defensive midfielder, which is what you need. You need that one who can sit there when Trent steps in as well, and Konate can move across, but Matip can't, unfortunately. It's just the way it is. Some players are built differently, and I'm pretty sure when Liverpool bought Matip, they never thought he'd end up having an opportunity of playing in that position. So probably not even Konate as well. So I think that. Yeah, I agree with Keifer that long term I can't see this formation.
No.
But what I can see is that it then gives Liverpool an option in the sense that now they've got 3 or 4 different ways of playing. Because remember last season they played 4-4-2 for some games. When they played the Rangers away in the Champions League and won
in the derby as well, didn't they play 4-1-2-1-2 as well?
Yeah, so it's not just about getting obsessed with one particular system. It's just that this one that they've been using a lot at the end of last season and during the summer is one that people haven't really seen that much of before. So that's why there's so much intrigue over it. So yeah, I think going back to the initial point about how all the teams Chelsea would have seen how Liverpool are conceding goals. I'm pretty sure they've also looked at the forward line and gone, hang on. They're scoring goals on the counter-attack, they're scoring goals from open play, they're scoring goals from transition, they're scoring goals from set pieces, they're scoring goals in every conceivable way. So that should be a concern for them.
And it's spread across the team too, which is a really nice sight. As I said earlier, I don't think Liverpool have had that for a number of years. Yeah,
absolutely. Just to do a quick couple of mentions then. Szoboszlai has come up a couple of times. The corners look good there. Ben Doak as well looked good last night. Again, we've seen a little bit of him in pre-season, and I think at the start of pre-season with Ben Doak, I was thinking maybe there's a top-end championship loan. Maybe that's the best way of going about it. But I don't know. Maybe my mind has slightly changed on that one, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he's done so well, hasn't he? Him and Bobby Clark are the two who've really stepped up and taken their chance. And I think obviously whilst Clark is a year older, I think he's probably a bit behind in his development. I think Doak is just as everyone has seen over these people who aren't regular watchers of the academy have been exposed to over the last 6 weeks of pre-season. He's fearless, he's direct, he's dynamic. He just brings something different to Liverpool, and we saw it a few times last night that he gets into those final third positions on the byline, and maybe his cross is a bit too much or his shot's not powerful enough for on target. But I think it's easy to forget because of how he plays that he's only 17 years old, and that will come with time and learning from the best forwards in the land, in the likes of Salah, Gakpo, Diaz, Nunez. So it's certainly not a worry at the moment. And I think as well with the loan, there's a lot of things that have to go right for a player. I think I mentioned it on last week's pod that I think you often forget about the person away from the pitch. So if you are going to send a 17-year-old who has recently relocated from Glasgow to then send him to somewhere down the country to into a completely different dressing room, could be quite a difficult ask regardless of how good of a footballer he is. But I think with the Europa League could prove to be a blessing for him, and maybe his opening. Obviously Liverpool will be top seed in their Europa League group, so you'd imagine they'll get a fairly favourable draw. And the games at Anfield where you're going to have large amounts of possession, it's going to be a rotated side, you're going to be playing at 2:00 on a Sunday. Doak is someone you would happily start from from the off, especially once you've had maybe 1 or 2 wins in that group, and you've kind of got the remaining 3 or 4 games to kind of set up the group and go for top spot. And then obviously with that comes the buy into the round of 16. So there's still plenty for Liverpool to play for, regardless of if they kind of breeze through the early games of the Europa League. And I think Doak is someone who can really benefit from that. As I say, I think Clark is probably the one who will go on loan, but as I say, I think it changes so fast. I remember Harvey Elliott being in a similar predicament a few years ago. I think he did the training camp in Austria for the month, or they did an extended camp there, and I think it was only on deadline day with that extended COVID window that he went to Blackburn. So it shows that things can change so quickly, and Liverpool obviously fluid to the situation. If someone comes in with a really good offer, the promise of first team football, and it's say if it's a Preston or a Blackburn or somewhere Liverpool know they have good relations with, it could prove to be too good to turn down. But then the flip side of that is, players like Phil Foden have shown that if you bide your time and you kind of,
And Curtis Jones.
Yeah, Curtis Jones as well. I mean, he's 22 going 23 this year. And you think about when he first burst onto the scene at 17, 18. I think he made his debut at Wolves in that FA Cup tie, didn't he? And came on midway through. He must have only been 18 at that stage. And you think now it's taken him 4 years really to kind of establish himself as a Liverpool first team member. I know he's played nearly 100 games, but to really say that you go into a game thinking, yeah, he deserves a shirt. It's taken him the best part of 4 years, and to think Doak is younger than him when he made his debut, but also showing perhaps more promising signs at this stage of his career. It certainly bodes well for Liverpool and for him, not only in the short term but also in the long term.
Yeah, certainly a very promising youngster for Liverpool. Let's move on to another promising youngster, Romeo Lavia. Doyle, 3 bids already for Liverpool. It seems to be edging ever closer, but not quite there yet. It's gone on for quite a while now, hasn't it? But what's the latest?
Yeah, I think I might get rid of this Cole before they actually sign him. Yeah, the latest is that they've had 3 bids. The third one, £46 million, roughly, turned down. I think what I think is quite interesting is that you look on social media, quite a lot of fans are like losing it over the way things have gone. I know Jamie Carragher came out and said it's embarrassing the way this is being dealt with, but a lot of the time these deals get done behind closed doors and you never get to see any of this. And Southampton have been, I don't know whether they're doing it on purpose or they're just really reveling in it. Every time Liverpool make a bid, they're just letting it leak out to somebody. Oh yeah, they made another one and we've turned that down. So it makes them look good. But I also think it makes them look good in the sense that for their fans as well, because they know quite well they're going to sell him to Liverpool. I think he's going to, and I think Liverpool, you can't blame them for going in at a low cost, because why on earth would you go, immediately just going to pay that fee? Why would you? You just wouldn't. I think the difference is that it's because it's been so public, people have been a little bit agitated or concerned about it. And I think the added complication is that Liverpool quite clearly need a defensive midfielder, and the season, it's been 10 days or something like that since they put the first bid in. It's been just within 2 weeks, and that's time that if they'd have just paid the money straight off, then they could have got him in and had the pre-season with him.
At this point, I suppose, Keifer, it's as both of you are off now. You've set him off. I suppose at this point in the season or the pre-season, just a few days before Chelsea, like we said before, I mean, it doesn't much matter whether Liverpool did this deal 2 or 3 days ago or whether Liverpool do this deal on Saturday night. He's not going to be playing against Chelsea. In that sense, at least, it probably doesn't really matter how long it takes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for Liverpool, probably the deadline or the soft deadline was probably ahead of Singapore. I think if they'd got him in then, Klopp obviously talks about how vital those sessions are out in Singapore and on camps to settle into the team, but also to understand his tactics. And we've seen with players like Fabinho, it can take a couple of months to kind of settle into the team. So I think obviously the initial plan would have been to have Fabinho alongside him, and I don't think there's a scenario where he does start at Chelsea, regardless of if he signs in June or May or whenever. I think obviously Fabinho's there. You're putting him in the Europa League games first, and then maybe you're probably not looking till after Christmas until you're maybe completing that transition. But obviously now with Fabinho and Henderson, 2 recognisable defensive midfielders both gone, I think Liverpool probably missed a trick by not putting their foot on the accelerator and trying to get him on board to that Singapore tour, or certainly halfway through that and getting him to join up, because I think now it's got to the point where Liverpool needed 1 with Fabinho, they need 2 now without Fabinho. I think there's a real danger of when Lavia does sign it, and if he does sign, it's not going to be what Liverpool needed, because they needed him alongside an experienced head. So I think when he does sign eventually, it will be a sense of relief, and I think obviously like tempers of kind of what this expectations of what this summer should have been have maybe been tempered down and watered down a bit, which I think is quite disappointing, because look at how proactive they were in the early weeks of the summer with getting McAllister through the door and Szoboszlai both before the first day back at the AXA training centre. And then you're thinking, right, that gives you, 6 weeks until the start of the new season. That's surely enough time to at least get 1 through. Okay, they didn't expect to lose Fabinho and Henderson, but no one forced them to sell them. That was totally down to Liverpool, and it's all relative. I mean, if they had got 20 million for Fabinho and 10 million for Henderson, and they got Lavia for 40 million, is that not the same as paying 50 million when you've got 50 million? So it's all relative. I think it's got to that point now where, as Doyle says, I do wonder if Southampton are maybe reveling in it because of all the Van Dijk saga. Is it their time to maybe get back and as Doyle says, it makes for a selling club, it makes them look far better. They can come out at the end of the window and be like, look, we tried everything to kind of keep hold of this player. Ultimately Liverpool paid this amount for a player with this amount of Premier League games. It's a really good deal for us. He didn't want to be here. But I think for Liverpool, it's kind of too little, too late. I think you think of the first 2 away games, Chelsea and Newcastle. I mean, to go into both of those games without a recognisable number 6, I think is suicidal. And I think, as I say, considering how Liverpool had set themselves up in the early weeks of the summer, I think it is quite disappointing that they're now going, almost on the back foot. I mean, we're sat here 4 days out from the first game of the season, and we're talking about putting, one of the new number 8s in as a number 6, or putting the best right back in as a number 6. And I just think that is probably a sign of, a sign of Liverpool's failure in the market really this summer.
So you're not too confident then?
No, I think they've shot themselves in the foot really, because as I say, the start to the window was so good, and then now to be sat here,
I mean the problem we got is that Liverpool, I can't remember whether I said it on this podcast or another one in the past, that they were very proactive at the start of the summer and got the 2 players in, great, and I think they'd have thought, well, yeah, we could probably bring in someone like Lavia and have him alongside Fabinho in the squad, as you just mentioned before, and I think they would have done that. So the preparation would have gone into the deal, definitely, and possibly even thought, we can probably get a centre back in as well if we can actually possibly manage it. And then of course the Saudis turn up and then nick two of the most experienced players, and both who can play in the same